Mary Dejevsky is going to bring us through as foreign affairs columnist at The Independent. Mary, there's still, I'm delighted you're with us this morning, there's still a lot of confusion, a lot of lack of information, misinformation, disinformation coming out of Syria. I just wonder what your thought is in regard to what happens now, especially to those who were heavily involved with the Assad regime and carried out his brutal torture and repression of his enemies.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to highlight this, and for them to be presumably seeking to flee the country or to go underground, it's you don't have to have any sympathy for them, but their position after regime change is very, very difficult, and there will be a lot of people looking either to leave the country or to vanish into the sort of popular undergrowth. It'll be very, very difficult after any sort of conflict, and particularly in Syria because of how summarily Assad left, and because the country's was at civil war for practically 6 years. So all that makes it incredibly difficult. I think maybe if I was looking at what's happened in the last sort of 48 hours, I think one of the most interesting developments is that the Americans are officially talking to the new rulers in Damascus. This is despite the fact that this particular group has been on the proscribed list as a terrorist group with the Americans. They're turning a blind eye to that, and they're talking to them anyway.
How much of an appetite will there be for vengeance, both within Syria and outside Syria? Because especially if you're talking to a new regime, it's interesting when these sort of regimes end, when there is conflict, when there is, in this case, a largely peaceful transition so far anyway. I wonder what the appetite for justice is, actually, Mary, when you've seen these things happen over the course of your career, because sometimes people want truth, sometimes people want justice, sometimes people want to say, it was all years ago, let's just move on.
I think there will be quite a big appetite for vengeance. I know that in the last week we've seen scenes really of unalloyed joy across Syria, and I've also seen an argument that says that the idea that Syria is made up of lots of different ethnic and religious groups is in a way misrepresentative, in that Syrians count themselves as Syrians first and foremost. But I'm not sure that that will rule out the grievances that so many people obviously have. I mean, we've seen the scenes outside the prisons, and people emerging from having been tortured or disappeared, people who are never going to emerge, and all the families who are there. Now, is everybody going to settle back into peace and reconciliation? I find that very difficult to believe.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And actually, I was speaking to a Syrian just the other day who was showing me all sorts of pictures, some of which I wasn't particularly happy to see, it must be said, but nonetheless realistic pictures, real pictures, I should say, of things that have happened in those prisons. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of that too, not just in the last few days, but over the course of your career and in real life too, Mary. If there is some form of international justice, I mean, who would administer it? Would it be the International Court of Justice? Would it be The Hague? There's no chance of getting Assad. I mean, he's safe now in Russia, or perhaps you disagree with that? I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's very, very early days. I mean, I've seen a very tantalizing reports that says there's basically a huge archive of documentation against Assad and the Assad clan, which is lodged in an unidentified European capital with a view to proceedings. Now, this obviously could take a very long time. There are various possibilities. There is indeed The Hague, International Criminal Court, all these sort of things. Probably you would think maybe a special tribunal would be set up. That's often a possibility in these cases that can be more productive than others. If there's going to be UN involvement, then you have the problem that Assad is currently under the protection of Moscow, and Russia, as a member of a permanent member of the Security Council, could veto any possibility of proceedings which have a sort of a UN umbrella. So special tribunal may be the way that this is going to go, but I think it will take quite a long time.
Mary, I wonder, just before you go, if I could get your thoughts on what's happening with Prince Andrew and the fact that we have this alleged spy at the heart of the British establishment. And so many Chinese spies apparently doing all sorts of things. We have another report on the front of the Sunday Telegraph about a Chinese influencer at the heart of Whitehall, a Foreign Office interpreter, is accused of running propaganda sites. The Chinese Communist Party certainly does nothing if not play the long game in a lot of this. What do you make of this affair, just generally, Mary?
Well, generally, I have to say, I mean, I'm not quite sceptical, but I think an awful lot is being made of something which in a way is quite routine. The idea that this businessman is actually a fully paid up spy, as opposed to somebody trying to weave his way into the corridors of power in the UK. I think those two things are different. The idea that he's a member of the Chinese Communist Party and a member of the, or associated with something called the United Work Department, those are not spy credentials automatically. To get the position he has as a successful businessman in China probably means that he is in cahoots with the regime anyway. Yeah. This is nothing spectacular. And it's quite hard for me. I mean, in all that's come out, it appears that it's designed both to tarnish China and additionally to tarnish Prince Andrew. But now, of course, it's hugely complicated because you've got two prime ministers who've been photographed with this guy. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that what this illustrates almost more than anything is the vagaries, the huge U-turns in UK policy towards China. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you were sitting in Beijing, you would be looking at London and simply asking, what is London's intentions under successive governments towards China? And
they don't know themselves. And actually, there's a very good book which is written by a frequent contributor to this programme, James Heal, alongside Harry Cole of The Sun, about Liz Truss, called Out of the Blue. And it demonstrates how Liz Truss, for example, I'm just choosing one example because I know it off the top of my head, has, I mean, fundamentally changed her position on China. We've had this sort of very dovish, let's bring them in, let's make sure they have huge business links to us, and then, oh no, China's the enemy, China's awful, China's dreadful. And we've had, I mean, both in Liz Truss's mind and indeed in successive Conservative administrations and Labour ones as well over the past 25, 30 years, as you correctly illustrate, Mary, screeching U-turns. Is China our friend? Is it not? Well, it kind of depends, what day of the week it is, and that's totally inconsistent and very confusing to a lot of people, presumably, including the business community.
No, absolutely. And, there was a time when we were talking about the golden era in UK-China relations, when Prince Andrew was a trade envoy, which was considered a positive thing to use royals in that capacity, and that Chinese were welcome. You had adverts for Huawei everywhere. They were sort of lodged in British Telecom's technology. That was absolutely fine. Chinese were funding nuclear power station technology. That was fine too. Then suddenly we say, no, this is absolutely encroachments on UK security. I think it's very, very difficult. We call people spies when, as it were, diplomacy and politics makes that useful, and the opposite.
It's absolutely true, and your analysis is spot on as usual. Mary, thank you very much indeed. That's Mary Dejevsky there. She's a columnist with The Independent. She's been right around the world. She's had a career covering foreign affairs, and she can turn her hand, as we have found out, to any foreign affairs story, which is just fantastic.